Every cassette tape you own is actively self-destructing. The magnetic coating that actually holds your music is slowly peeling off the plastic backing. Archivists call this sticky shed syndrome. Over the decades, the chemical binder holding that magnetic layer together breaks down. If those tapes have been sitting in a hot attic or a damp basement, that process accelerates, turning the binder into a gummy residue. This graph illustrates exactly what happens to the audio. You get a steady decline in signal integrity as the magnetic particles lose their charge, followed by a sheer cliff drop when the physical binder completely fails. Because of this, you should never load an old tape into a player without inspecting it first. If the tape looks dull, wavy, or leaves brown dust on your fingers, playing it will strip the remaining audio right off the reel. Running a severely degraded tape through a cheap mechanism to get a quick digital file often guarantees that you will permanently destroy the only existing copy of that media. When you pull a box like this out of storage, you face an immediate choice about how to save it. The path of least resistance is buying a modern USB to PC converter. You plug it in, press play, and the software spits out an MP3. The alternative is sourcing actual vintage audio hardware from the peak of the cassette era. Heavy, dedicated decks designed to pull every ounce of dynamic range from the magnetic ribbon. You have to choose between a fast, frictionless transfer and capturing the actual fidelity of the original recording. If you choose poorly, the digital file you create will permanently bake in the mechanical flaws, hisses, and pitch wobbles of the playback machine. Modern USB cassette converters act as an external sound card. They bypass your computer's analog inputs entirely, letting you capture a tape without routing any cables or installing drivers. This matrix shows the gap between marketing claims and actual mechanical realities. They promise CD quality, but contain a cheap 2-track head and zero hardware decoding. Notice the wow and flutter metrics. Because these modern units use lightweight motors, the tape speed wavers constantly, bending the pitch. These new mechanisms also lack the sensors and circuitry to properly bias Type 2 chrome or Type 4 metal tapes, which were specifically designed for high-end audio reproduction. The USB connection gives you a clean digital pipeline to your computer, but it's carrying a muddy, compressed signal with severe high-frequency roll-off. While you get your digital file instantly, the cheap mechanics of the USB converter ensure you lose the true fidelity of the original recording. For archival capture, the target hardware is a logic-controlled stereo deck from the late 1980s or 1990s. These machines automatically detect the specific chemical formulation of the tape you insert, adjusting the equalization and bias to match, which restores the high-end clarity. They also feature built-in hardware decoding for Dolby noise reduction, which strips away the inherent background hiss of magnetic tape without aggressively cutting into the music. But the barrier to entry is steep. You have to hunt down functional vintage gear, and professional shops routinely charge upwards of $200 to service the aging internal components. The budget-conscious alternative is finding an unserviced, non-working deck at a thrift store and repairing the primary point of failure yourself. Almost every old deck has a stretched or snapped rubber drive belt. You have to open the chassis, clean out the degraded rubber, and manually stretch a replacement square belt over the motor pulleys to restore tension. Archival quality ignores modern convenience completely. You either pay a premium for a professionally serviced machine, or you trade your own time and labor to restore one. Even with a perfectly restored vintage deck, the way you physically connect it to your computer will dictate the final quality. This schematic details a common mistake: routing the deck's headphone jack into your computer rather than the unamplified RCA lineouts. The headphone output pushes audio through an internal amplifier, introducing massive low-frequency rumble and background hiss into your file. Inside the machine, if you install replacement belts that don't match the original diameter perfectly, a dual-deck system will play tapes at slightly different speeds, altering the pitch. And if the magnetic playheads are coated in dust or knocked slightly out of alignment, the resulting transfer will sound muddy and drop out constantly. You can spend hundreds on high-end vintage hardware, but an improper calibration or a lazy cable connection will still produce a terrible digital archive. This flowchart maps out the hardware setup you need. It starts with the content, voice dictation versus high-fidelity music. Your budget and timeline then determine the endpoint, a USB converter, a DIY repair, or a serviced audio file deck. If you are just saving old answering machine messages, spoken word dictation, or highly degraded source audio, the USB converter is a perfectly logical, low-friction choice. The lost high-end frequencies simply do not matter for spoken word. If you want to digitize music but are on a strict budget, buying a broken 90s deck, installing a $3 replacement belt, and capturing through free open-source software yields the highest return on investment. There is no single correct device to buy. The right choice is dictated entirely by whether you want to spend your cash, your time, or your audio fidelity. For the archivist, the rule is absolute. You never let a generic modern playback mechanism touch a rare release or a Type 4 metal tape. The cost of professional maintenance on logic-controlled equipment is an investment in precision. It guarantees stable motor speeds, accurate head alignment, and perfect bias detection. Cheap USB converters are disposable tools. They will pull the raw audio off a tape, but they will never capture the actual nuance or dynamic range of the format. Whatever hardware you choose, the physical media is on a strict countdown. Every day, the chemical binder holding those memories together breaks down. Securing the right playback hardware today is the only way to accurately digitize those recordings before the magnetic tape turns to dust.